Alright, so the series of videos with scary names continues. Like, you're like, hybridized orbitals? What does hybridized mean? Conjugate pi bonding? Electron delocalization? What are these things? Well, so what it is this idea, and it's a reality actually, so it's more than just an idea, but that the electrons, so before they were associated between, say, two atoms, or they're kind of assigned to an atom in a lone pair. Well, sometimes electrons aren't assigned to an atom. They are able to move freely around the molecule. And so that creates kind of these molecular level orbitals, which, well, yeah, we'll talk about it more in the next video. So I guess I could just throw the name out now. They're called molecular orbitals. But where the electron isn't associated with any particular atom, but just there's a specific region of the molecule. Like, it's like a racetrack it's allowed to move around on along the whole molecule. And that's created by conjugate pi bonding. And so I'll explain what that is, and then we'll move into this. So, the easiest way to tell if something has conjugate pi bonding, simplest explanation, I like to start with simplest explanation, is just that if a molecule has alternating double and single bonds, and I'm going to use the same example as the book because it's a darn good example, and they stole it from me. It's my favorite example for this. So it's like you have double, single, like you have a chain of bonds. So this has to have multiple central atoms. So it has to be a somewhat complicated molecule, at least complicated for where we are today. Alright, so if that happens, then you have conjugate pi bonding. And that's going to happen as well. So for example, benzene. So it's a ring of 6 carbons. So it kind of looks like a hexagon here. And it has 1 hydrogen off of each of these. Okay, and it has alternating double and single bonds. And so it also has a bunch of interesting stuff. So it also has a resonance structure, because I could have drawn my double bonds here, here, and here, and then left these all as single. That would be equally correct. So it has a resonance structure, which is important to conjugate pi bonding as well. But if we look at these carbons, what hybrid orbitals do I have on that carbon? So it has 1, 2, 3 areas of electrons. So that means that the carbon is sp2. What about this carbon? 1, 2, 3. This carbon, 1, 2, 3. They're all sp2. And so what does that mean? Well, the molecule is flat as a pancake. You know, this is 120 degrees, right? That's our bond angle. All these bond angles are 120 degrees. So it's a very stable molecule, because that's the natural bond angle for a hexagon. There's no what we call ring strain, where there's a mismatch between reality and what the electrons would like to do. But more importantly, it has unhybridized p orbitals, right? And so this has unhybridized p orbitals, this has unhybridized p orbitals, and they overlap. This has unhybridized p orbitals, this has unhybridized p orbitals, they overlap to get us our pi bond, right? Well, what about, so if they're overlapping this way, couldn't they overlap this way? Yeah, the answer is yes. And so what we have is all of these carbons have p orbitals that are overlapping above and below the ring. And so we have, that's what a conjugate pi bond is when you have two atoms in a double bond, and you have 2 atoms in a double bond, if there's only one bond between them, they're going to overlap. And so we have this situation. Okay, and so we're going to have a sigma bond, right? From the sp2, and we're going to have that, going. I'm going to make it look linear, but keep in mind that it's a ring. Okay, so we have these sigma bonds, and then above it, we've got our p orbitals, Well, they're all going to have the p orbital. So it isn't like that this is only going to have a pi bond here, and then this is going to have a pi bond over there to the next carbon. It's going to spread out across the whole space. They're going to overlap here and here. So you get pi bonding throughout. Okay? So it overlaps in both directions. That's what I've been saying. And so what we have is, first off, we have a resonance, right? We can have a ring like the one I just drew, or we can have a ring where I move all my double bonds one spot. And so that means I don't have double and single bonds. I have basically like 1.5 bonds. I have somewhere in the middle. And this helps explain that, because what I have is I have half a pi bond. If I look at this middle card, I have sigma and a sigma going each way. But if I look between these two carbons, I have half a pi bond going this way and I have half a pi bond going this way. So I have a 1.5 bond and I have a 1.5 bond. So what we have is if we look at the ring, let's say the ring is flat. There are pi bonds that run the whole length of it, above and below, half and half. And that's what a conjugate pi bond is. And that's what makes the electrons delocalize, because if an electron is in these shared pi bonds, it's not just going to be here. It can move. It becomes like an interstate. The electrons can move around the whole molecule. And so it makes benzene really stable, because it has the ability, it has this strong orbital that spans the whole molecule. So this is a tricky idea, I know. So you want to take some time to think about it. So delocalized. So what does localized mean? It means it's in a spot, right? Delocalized means it's not. It is moving around. And so these sigma bonds, okay, these sigma bonds have localized electrons. They're between the carbons. These pi bonds, because they overlap into each other all the way around, allow the electrons to be shared between, say, these two carbons, because it can just kind of keep moving through p orbitals that are overlapping and come over here. Like, that's something that can happen. And so they move around. And so we have 2, 4, 6 electrons in these p orbitals. So there are 6 electrons being shared around the whole molecule, which helps hold it together even tighter. And so that's kind of the explanation of what's going on with benzene. And then I can't resist talking about another thing about benzene. So it's the only situation I'm aware of, like ever, where someone solved their problems by smoking opium. No joke. So the chemist that was trying to figure out this structure, he's going, okay, he gets to the point where he's like, okay, like essentially I have 6 carbons, I have 6 hydrogens. He's coming up with all these different structures. He's trying to figure out like how this, and it has such interesting properties. Like these bond energies are these are very strong bonds, and so it takes a lot of energy to break them, more than you might expect. There's no easy piece to really pop off. Like, what's going on here? It's such a stable molecule. So people were trying to figure this out. Well, one guy was working on it. He ends up, I don't know, he had a rough day at work or whatever, so he goes to an opium den, like I guess he did back then, and he starts smoking the opium, and then he has a dream of a snake eating his tail. This is all true. And then he goes like, oh, he figured it out. It's a ring structure with alternating, double and single. Like, he figured out the structure of benzene from an opium dream. So I want to be clear, like, I'm not encouraging that. Like, if you're struggling with a homework problem, there's better things to do than that. But so one time in the history of the world, it paid off. Everyone else just kind of forgot what their problems were, I think. But this guy somehow. Anyway, this is also an interesting molecule because it was really popular for solvents because it was very stable. It's a non-polar solvent, somewhat flammable, but It has a higher flash point than a lot of other hydrocarbons, so it was very popular. It didn't seem to be any downside, except it turned out it's extremely carcinogenic. So your DNA, you have your bases, you have like A with T, G with C, they're all organized in your DNA. Well, if benzene comes along, it is flat as a pancake. Right? These are all trigonal planar carbons, so they're all just all the way around. So it is a flat molecule. And so it kind of just sits in there like a CD or something, just like slides in, or I guess a Blu-ray disc if we want to keep it modern. And it just fits in right between those base pairs. And so it screws up DNA replication, transcription, translation, all that stuff. Well, I guess not translation or transcript. Well, anyway, it messes up one of them, not the other. It doesn't mess with making the proteins. It just messes with the stuff involving the DNA. So it's very carcinogenic because if you damage DNA through replication, you get the wrong copy later, you can get a cancer cell. So it's something that actually has very strict requirements about working with today. But say 50 years ago, basically no requirements. It was like a safe thing. And one of my physical chemistry professor when I was in undergraduate studies told a story to us about how he was a theoretician and he only ever did one experiment, and it was to see how plastics moved. They diffused, so how plastics moved, basically, like how they change shape over time. The thing about plastics is they move very slowly. And if you're a PhD student, you don't want to wait 20 years to get your data. That's not how the career track works, right? I've known people to do graduate school for 10 years. Most people are around somewhere between 4 and 8, somewhere in that range. No one's around 20, so you can't wait that long. So what does he do to speed it up? You throw in a solvent, and you make some measurements, and you make some assumptions. That solvent he ended up being benzene. And so he was telling us about how he just had this giant liter beaker of benzene in his unventilated office, which was basically like a closet. And it's the only experiment he ever did. And we all start laughing. And he's like, hey, no one knew then. Like, everyone in the class knew about this. We were all chemists, because this is a class where it's basically all chemists. So we all know about the dangers of benzene. He's just like, we didn't know then. We didn't know. I thought it was the safest thing to work with. I didn't know. I didn't want to burn my office down, So sometimes, understanding evolves. So from snake eating its tail to, compact disc sliding in between DNA base pairs and causing biological hazards. It's got a strong history, and it's a great example of resonance and conjugate pi bonding going hand in hand. So something to keep in mind. So generally when you're seeing resonance, you're going to see some sort of conjugate system. Not always, but generally. All right, so this was probably the trickiest part of this chapter. So the last video is going to be about molecular orbital theory, and that's coming up next. That's going to be a longer video. There's a lot to say there. But this idea of orbitals, like we have this conjugate pi orbital system spanning the whole molecule. Hybrid orbital theory can't explain that. Can't explain energy levels. MO theory can. So molecular orbital theory works for that. And so what MO theory is, well, we'll talk about in the next video, but it's going to build on this idea of delocalized electrons moving around the entire molecule, being shared everywhere, and helping hold it together more strongly.